Our journey begins in the heavens with two divine beings, Izanagi and his sister wife, Izanami. Standing on the floating bridge of heaven, they gazed down at the swirling chaos below. Izanagi dipped a jeweled spear into the primordial brine. As he lifted it, drops fell from the spear's tip, coagulating to form the very first island, Onagoro. This was the start. Descending to this new land, they performed a sacred marriage ritual and gave birth to the islands of Japan, one by one, creating the archipelago we know today. They also brought forth countless kami, or gods, to populate the land, sky, and sea. But creation is often tinged with tragedy. While giving birth to the fire god Kagutsuchi, Izanami was horribly burned and perished. Overcome with grief, Izanagi journeyed to Yomi, the land of the dead, to bring her back. But he broke his one promise, not to look at her. When he lit a torch, he saw not his beautiful wife, but a decaying, monstrous form. Horrified, he fled, sealing the entrance to Yomi with a massive boulder, forever separating the worlds of the living and the dead. This act of purification, washing the filth of the underworld from his body, gave birth to three of the most important deities in the Shinto pantheon. From his left eye emerged Amaterasu Omikami, the radiant goddess of the sun. Amaterasu would become the most revered of all kami, the divine ancestor of Japan's imperial family. Legend says that her great-great-grandson, Imu, became the first emperor of Japan, establishing a divine lineage that continues to this day. This foundational myth connects the imperial house directly to the gods, cementing their sacred authority and shaping the very soul of Japanese identity, a concept known as kakutai, or national polity. This belief, that the emperor is a living god, a descendant of Amaterasu, would influence Japanese history for millennia. Let's rewind the clock even further, beyond the myths, to a time archaeologists call the Jōmon period, which began as far back as 14,000 BCE. The name Jōmon means cord-marked, and it comes from the distinctive patterns pressed into the pottery of the time. These were some of the earliest ceramics ever created in the world. The Jōmon people were not farmers. They were sophisticated hunter-gatherers, living in settled communities for thousands of years. Imagine small villages of pit dwellings, their thatched roofs peeking out from the earth. The people thrived on the rich bounty of the land and sea, hunting deer and boar, gathering nuts and plants, and fishing for salmon and shellfish. The massive shell mounds they left behind, called keisuka, are like ancient garbage dumps that give us an incredible window into their diet and daily life. But Jōmon life wasn't just about survival. It was rich with culture and spirituality. They crafted intricate pottery, not just for cooking, but likely for rituals too. They made mysterious clay figurines called dogger, often depicting female forms with exaggerated features. Are they fertility goddesses, shamanic tools, protective charms? We don't know for sure, but they hint at a complex spiritual world. They also created beautiful jewelry from jade, bone, and stone, and practiced unique burial customs, sometimes burying their dead in jars or flexed positions, suggesting a belief in an afterlife. These weren't simple, primitive people. They were artists, engineers, and spiritual thinkers who lived in harmony with their environment for over 10,000 years. Then, around 900 BC, a monumental shift began to ripple across the archipelago. New people and new ideas started arriving from the Asian mainland, most likely from the Korean peninsula. This marked the beginning of the Yayoi period, a transformative era that would lay the final groundwork for ancient Japan. The biggest change was agriculture. The Yayoi people brought the knowledge of wet rice farming. This was a game changer. Instead of just hunting and gathering, people could now cultivate their own food, leading to food surpluses, population growth, and the establishment of larger, more permanent villages. Life became organized around the seasons of planting and harvesting. You can almost picture the first paddy fields being carved into the landscape, forever changing Japan's scenery and society. Along with rice came another revolutionary technology: metallurgy. The Yayoi people introduced both bronze and iron. Bronze was used for ceremonial objects like bells, called dotaku, mirrors, and weapons. These beautifully crafted items weren't just for show. They were symbols of power and status for the emerging elite. Iron, on the other hand, was far more practical. It was used to make stronger tools and more effective weapons, improving farming efficiency and giving a deadly edge in conflict. This new way of life led to a more complex social structure. The small egalitarian bands of the Jōmon period gave way to powerful clans, or yuji, each led by a chief who controlled land, resources, and people. Society became stratified, with a ruling class, priests, warriors, and common farmers. These clans often fought with each other for control of the best land and resources, and fortified villages became common. It was a more competitive and organized world. By the end of the Yayoi period, around 300 CE, Japan was a collection of dozens of small, clan-based states. Ancient Chinese records, like the records of the Three Kingdoms, give us our first written descriptions of Japan, which they called Wa. They describe a queen named Himiko, a powerful shamaness who ruled over a large federation of clans called Yamato. She didn't rule through military might alone, but through religious authority and diplomacy, communicating with the spirit world. The story of Himiko shows how, even as society was changing, the old connection between spiritual power and political leadership remained incredibly strong. So, from the divine creation of the islands by Izanagi and Izanami, to the sun goddess Amaterasu and her imperial descendants, we see the mythological bedrock of Japan. From the 10,000-year culture of the Jōmon hunter-gatherers, with their incredible pottery and mysterious figurines, we see the deep, ancient roots of Japanese civilization. And from the Yayoi period, with its transformative introduction of rice farming and metalworking, we see the formation of the clans and social structures that would define the nation for centuries to come. This mythic dawn was not just a single event, but a long, slow awakening. So, who were the Yamato people? Originating in the fertile plains of the Nara Basin, the Yamato clan gradually expanded its influence through a clever mix of military conquest, strategic alliances, and marital ties. They weren't just warriors, they were master politicians. By the 5th century, the Yamato rulers had established themselves as the leading power, claiming a special kind of authority. They didn't just say they were the strongest, they claimed divine descent from the sun goddess, Amaterasu Omikami, the most revered deity in the Shinto religion. This divine lineage became the ultimate justification for their rule, a foundation that would support the Japanese imperial line for over 1,000 years. This is the very origin of the Japanese emperor. But building a state isn't just about military might and divine claims. It's also about knowledge and culture. And the Yamato rulers were hungry for both. They looked across the sea to their sophisticated neighbors, the kingdoms of Korea and the powerful dynasties of China. Japan in this era was on the receiving end of one of the most significant cultural transfers in history. One of the first and most crucial imports was a writing system. Before this, Japan had no way to write its own language. Scribes and scholars from the Korean peninsula, particularly from the kingdom of Baekje, brought Chinese characters, known as kanji, to the Yamato court. Suddenly, the Japanese elite could record royal decrees, keep tax records, and compile histories. This was a game changer, allowing for the creation of a centralized bureaucracy and a recorded national identity. Along with writing came something even more profound: a new religion. Buddhism arrived in Japan around the mid-6th century, presented as a gift from a Korean king. It was a sophisticated philosophy with beautiful art, intricate scriptures, and a message of enlightenment. At first, its introduction caused a major conflict at the Yamato court. Powerful clans like the Soga, who championed the new faith, clashed with traditionalist clans like the Mononobe, who defended the native Shinto gods. It was a culture war for the soul of the nation. But ultimately, the Soga clan won out, and Buddhism was officially adopted by the court. This wasn't just a spiritual change. It was a catalyst for art, architecture, and new ways of thinking about life, death, and the universe. The climax of this incredible period of transformation comes in the late 6th and early 7th centuries, known as the Asuka period. This era is dominated by two towering figures, Empress Suiko and her nephew, Prince Shotoku. Empress Suiko was one of Japan's first reigning empresses, a powerful and savvy ruler who navigated the complex clan politics of her time. But it was Prince Shotoku, serving as her regent, who became the great architect of the new Japanese state. Prince Shotoku was a visionary. He was a devout Buddhist and a brilliant scholar of Chinese classics. He understood that to build a strong, centralized state like China's Tang dynasty, the Yamato court needed to break from old clan-based politics. In 604 AD, he issued the 17-article constitution. This wasn't a constitution in the modern sense, but rather a set of moral and ethical guidelines for government officials, heavily influenced by Buddhist and Confucian principles. It stressed harmony, duty, and loyalty to the sovereign. It was a blueprint for a new kind of government, one based on merit and obedience to the central authority, not just clan loyalty. Shotoku also re-established formal diplomatic ties with China, sending official embassies to the Sui court. These missions were not just about diplomacy, they were learning expeditions. Japanese monks, scholars, and students traveled with the envoys and stayed in China for years, soaking up everything they could about law, art, government, and technology. They returned to Japan as agents of change, bringing back the latest ideas to help build their nation. Prince Shotoku's efforts laid the essential groundwork for the Taika reforms a few decades later, which would fully implement a Chinese-style legal and administrative system, solidifying the emperor's power and creating the foundations of classical Japan. So, from the giant Kofun mounds to the 17-article constitution, the Yamato period was a whirlwind of state-building, diplomacy, and cultural revolution. It was the time when a collection of powerful clans, led by the Yamato, forged a national identity. They looked outward for inspiration, adopting and adapting writing, religion, and systems of government from the continent. But they blended these new ideas with their own native traditions, like the divine lineage of the emperor. This unique synthesis created a civilization that was both part of the East Asian world and distinctly Japanese. The rise of Yamato wasn't just the beginning of a state, it was the dawn of Japan itself. For the first time in their recent history, Japan had a permanent capital, a magnificent city called Haijukyo, known today as Nara. Modeled after the Grand Tang capital of Chang'an in China, Nara was more than just a political center. It was a crucible of culture and religion. This was an age of centralization, where the emperor, believed to be a divine descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu, sought to build a powerful, unified state. One of the most powerful forces shaping this new era was Buddhism. Arriving from the mainland, it quickly found favor with the imperial court. Emperor Shomu, a devout believer, ordered the construction of massive temples throughout the land, with the Grand Tadaiji in Nara as the head temple. Inside, he commissioned the creation of a colossal bronze statue of the Buddha, the Daibutsu. This wasn't just an act of faith, it was a powerful statement, a symbol of the emperor's authority and his prayer for the nation's protection and prosperity. The fusion of state power and Buddhist belief defined the Nara landscape, creating a unique cultural and political synthesis. But the influence of Buddhism grew so strong that the court began to feel overshadowed. The powerful clergy started meddling in political affairs, creating tension and instability. To escape this growing influence and reassert imperial authority, the decision was made to move the capital. After a brief stop in Nagaoka-kyo, the court finally settled in a new city in 794. They named it Heian-kyo, the capital of peace and tranquility. We know it today as Kyoto. The move to Heian-kyo marked the beginning of a new, dazzling chapter, the Heian period. Spanning nearly 400 years, this was an age of unparalleled elegance and cultural refinement. While the Nara period had looked outward to China for inspiration, the Heian era saw Japan turn inward, cultivating a distinctly unique aesthetic. Formal ties with Tang China were severed, allowing Japanese culture to blossom on its own terms. Life at the Heian court was a world unto itself, a small, insulated society obsessed with beauty, status, and artistic expression. This was the world of the Kyuge, the court aristocracy. For these nobles, life was a carefully orchestrated performance. Every detail mattered: the color of one's robes, the style of one's handwriting, the composition of a poem, even the scent of incense one wore. Aesthetic sensibility, known as miyabi, or courtly elegance, was the ultimate measure of a person's worth. Men of the court were expected to be skilled in everything from archery and horsemanship to Chinese classics and calligraphy. Women, though living more secluded lives often behind screens and curtains, were the true drivers of a new literary tradition, with more time for introspection and personal expression. Noble women began to write diaries, memoirs, and poetry using the newly developed Japanese script. Kana. This creative explosion gave birth to some of the greatest masterpieces of Japanese literature. Sei Shonagon, a lady-in-waiting to an empress, captured the witty, observant, and often fleeting moments of court life in her brilliant collection of essays. The Pillow Book. But the crowning achievement of the era, and arguably the world's first novel, was The Tale of Genji, written by another court lady, Murasaki Shikibu. This sprawling epic follows the life and romantic escapades of the shining prince, Hikaru Genji. More than just a romance, it's a profound psychological novel, a detailed tapestry of Heian court society, its intricate customs, its obsession with aesthetics, and its deep sense of mono no aware, a gentle sadness for the transience of things. While the emperor reigned as a divine figurehead, real political power in the Heian period began to shift. It slipped into the hands of a single, powerful aristocratic family, the Fujiwara clan. Through a brilliant and patient strategy of political maneuvering, the Fujiwara established themselves as the true rulers of Japan. Their method was simple, yet effective. They married their daughters to emperors. A Fujiwara daughter would become an imperial consort and, with luck, give birth to the next emperor. Her father or brother would then be appointed as Sessho, or Kampaku, regent, for a child emperor or chief advisor to an adult one. This meant that the emperor's father-in-law or brother-in-law held the real authority, making decisions of state while the emperor was occupied with ceremonial and religious duties. For centuries, the Fujiwara clan dominated the government, placing their family's interests above all else and turning the imperial throne into a puppet position. Their magnificent villas and lavish lifestyles defined the peak of aristocratic extravagance. But this golden age of courtly splendor couldn't last forever. While the nobles in Heian-kyo composed poetry and debated the shades of a kimono, the world outside the capital was changing. The centralized government system envisioned in the Nara period was slowly eroding. Imperial authority, long outsourced to the Fujiwara, became increasingly weak. In the provinces, a new power was rising. Land ownership became concentrated in the hands of powerful clans and tax-exempt estates. To protect these lands and manage their affairs, landowners began to hire armed guards and managers. These men were skilled in the martial arts, loyal to their patrons rather than the distant court in Kyoto. They were the early samurai. Over time, these provincial warrior families grew more powerful and independent, building their own armies and challenging the authority of the central government. The elegant, refined world of the Heian court was becoming detached from the reality of the country it supposedly governed. The decline was gradual but inevitable. Internal power struggles within the Fujiwara clan, conflicts over imperial succession, and the growing military power of provincial warriors all chipped away at the foundations of the Heian system. The era of the poet and the courtier was drawing to a close. A new era, defined not by the brush, but by the sword, was about to begin. The Nara and Heian periods were the classical heart of Japan. They established the enduring role of the emperor, introduced Buddhism as a major cultural force, and forged a unique artistic and literary identity that continues to inspire the world. From the solemn grandeur of Nara's great Buddha to the delicate, fleeting beauty captured in the tale of Genji, this was an age that defined elegance. It was a time when art was life and life was an art form. In the twilight of Japan's Heian period, the imperial court in Kyoto was a world of exquisite poetry, refined arts, and subtle political games. But beyond the capital's gilded halls, a new power was stirring. In the provinces, a warrior class, the samurai, was honing its skills and consolidating its influence. For centuries, the emperor reigned supreme. But true power had shifted to the hands of aristocratic clans, most notably the Fujiwara. They controlled the court through strategic marriages and political maneuvering. To protect their vast estates and enforce their will in the distant provinces, these nobles relied on hired swords, skilled warriors who lived by a code of loyalty and martial prowess. These were the first samurai. As the central government's authority weakened, two of these warrior clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, grew immensely powerful. Both traced their lineage back to imperial princes who had left the court to make their fortunes in the provinces. They became the military arms of rival court factions, and their rivalry festered. Fueled by ambition and a thirst for ultimate control, the stage was set for a monumental clash. The conflict erupted in the mid-12th century with the Heian and Heiji rebellions. These were brutal, short-lived clashes for control of the capital, but they marked a terrifying turning point. The Taira, led by the brilliant and ruthless Taira no Kumori, emerged victorious. He exiled the surviving Minamoto leaders and, in an unprecedented move, stalled himself and his family in the highest positions of the imperial court. The age of the warrior had begun. For 2 decades, the Taira clan ruled Japan. They adopted the lavish lifestyle of the court aristocrats they had replaced, indulging in luxury and art, but their arrogance and their grip on power bred resentment. In the provinces, the scattered remnants of the Minamoto clan were biding their time. A call to arms came from an imperial prince, and the country was plunged into the Genpei War, a 5-year epic of bloodshed and heroism. Leading the Minamoto resurgence was Minamoto no Yoritomo, a cold, calculating strategist exiled since childhood. His younger half-brother, Minamoto no Yoshitsune, was his polar opposite. A charismatic and audacious military genius, one of the most celebrated commanders in Japanese history, while Yoritomo consolidated his power base in the east. Establishing a new military capital in Kamakura, Yoshitsune led the Minamoto armies in a series of dazzling victories. The Warsaw legendary battles fought on land and sea. At Ishinotani, Yoshitsune led a daring cavalry charge down a steep cliff face, surprising the Taira from behind and routing their forces. The conflict culminated in 1185 at the naval battle of Dan-Nura. Trapped and facing total annihilation, the Taira clan chose death over surrender. The Taira grandmother, holding the child emperor Ontoku and the sacred imperial regalia, leaped into the waves, followed by the remaining Taira warriors. Their clan was erased from history, and the sea itself seemed to mourn their tragic end. With the Taira vanquished, Minamoto no Yoritomo stood as the undisputed master of Japan. However, his ambition was matched only by his paranoia. Fearing his brilliant brother Yoshitsune's popularity and influence, Yoritomo turned on him. Hunted as a traitor, Yoshitsune's heroic tale ended in tragedy, forced to take his own life. This ruthless act secured Yoritomo's absolute authority. In 1192, the emperor bestowed upon Yoritomo the title of Sai Tishogun, or barbarian subduing generalissimo. This was more than just a title. It was the foundation of a new government. Yoritomo established the Kamakura shogunate, a military government or bakufu that would rule Japan for the next 700 years. The emperor remained a figurehead in Kyoto, but real power now resided with the shogun and his warrior vassals in Kamakura. A new feudal system was born, built on a foundation of loyalty and military service. Life under the Kamakura shogunate was defined by the way of the warrior, or bushido. While the code wouldn't be formally written down for centuries, its core tenets were forged in this era. Loyalty to one's lord above all else, courage in the face of death, honor in all actions, and mastery of the martial arts. These ideals were the bedrock of samurai society. The sword wasn't just a weapon, it was the symbol of their status and the embodiment of their soul. This new warrior-led order would face its greatest test, not from within, but from across the sea. In the late 13th century, Kublai Khan, the Mongol emperor of China, demanded Japan's submission. The court in Kyoto was terrified, but the samurai of the Kamakura shogunate refused. In 1274 and again in 1281, the Khan launched two of the largest naval invasions in pre-modern history. The samurai faced a formidable foe. The Mongol forces were a disciplined, multi-ethnic army using advanced tactics and weapons, including gunpowder bombs. The samurai, accustomed to individual combat and duels, had to adapt quickly to fighting as a unified force against a foreign invader. They fought with desperate courage along the coast of Kyushu, holding back the invaders at bay. In both invasions, just as the situation seemed most dire, nature intervened. Massive typhoons descended upon the Mongol fleets, wrecking their ships and decimating their armies. The Japanese called these storms kamikaze, or divine winds, believing they were a sign of heavenly protection. The Mongol threat was eliminated, and the samurai's reputation was solidified. They had defended the nation and proven the strength of their new warrior government. The dawn of the samurai was a period of profound transformation, born from the ashes of a declining imperial court. The Genpei War forged a new political reality. The Kamakura shogunate established a new order. And the Mongol invasions cemented the warrior's role as the protector of the realm. The samurai had risen from provincial swords for hire to become the undisputed rulers of Japan, creating a legacy of honor, warfare, and discipline that continues to fascinate the world. The late 15th century, an era defined by chaos, steel, ambition, and the forging of a new nation from the fires of conflict. It all began with the slow decay of the Ashikaga shogunate. For over 100 years, the Ashikaga shoguns, based in Kyoto, were the supreme military rulers of Japan. But by the mid-1400s, their authority was a shadow of its former self. Powerful regional clans, known as the Shugo, had grown fat on land and influence, and they began to openly defy the central government. The shogun had become a puppet, and the strings were fraying. The breaking point came in 1467, with the Dunnin War. What started as a simple succession dispute over who would be the next shogun spiraled into a decade-long, devastating civil war that laid waste to the capital, Kyoto. The war ended not with a clear victor, but with a complete shattering of central authority. The Ashikaga shogunate was left powerless, and Japan fractured. The old order was dead. A new, terrifying age had begun. From the ashes of the Wannin War rose a new breed of warrior lord, the daimyo. These were not the old courtly aristocrats. They were ruthless, ambitious men who seized power through military might. This was the era of Gikaku-yo, the low overthrowing the high. Samurai retainers assassinated their masters, branch families usurped main lineages, and minor landowners carved out their own domains. Dozens of these daimyo men, like Takeda Shingen, the Tiger of Kai, and his lifelong rival was Sugi Kenshin, the Dragon of Akigo, emerged across the archipelago. Each ruled their territory as an independent kingdom. and each dreamed of one day marching on Kyoto and claiming the ultimate prize: rule over all of Japan. The warfare of this period was constant and unforgiving. Castles became the cornerstones of power, their designs evolving rapidly to withstand prolonged sieges and the new threat of firearms. Battles were not just clashes of swords and spears. Strategy and deception were paramount. Ninja or shinobi were employed for espionage, sabotage, and assassination. Betrayal was a common tool of statecraft. Alliances were made and broken with shocking speed, often sealed with marriages and then shattered by a dagger in the back. A daimyo could be at the height of his power one day and a headless corpse the next. Every decision was a gamble for survival. This bloody stalemate, this endless cycle of conquest and betrayal, might have continued indefinitely. But then, from the unexceptional province of Owari, a figure emerged who would change everything. His name was Oda Nobunaga, often dismissed in his youth as the Fool of Owari for his bizarre behavior and disregard for tradition. Nobunaga possessed a brilliant military mind, a ruthless pragmatism, and a vision that went far beyond mere provincial conquest. Nobunaga was an innovator. While other daimyo were hesitant, he embraced new technologies, particularly firearms introduced by Portuguese traders. He equipped his ashigaro, or peasant foot soldiers, with thousands of matchlock muskets. At the pivotal Battle of Nagasino in 1575, Nobunaga's gunners, firing in coordinated volleys from behind wooden barricades, annihilated the legendary cavalry charge of the Takeda clan. It was a tactical revolution that signaled the end of the traditional samurai warrior's dominance on the battlefield. One by one, Nobunaga crushed his rivals. With his motto, Tenkafubu, rule the realm by force, he marched into Kyoto in 1568, effectively ending the Ashikaga shogunate and beginning the process of unification. Over the next decade, he subjugated nearly a third of Japan. He was brutal, burning down the warrior monk stronghold of Mount Hiei and slaughtering thousands to make an example. He was on the very cusp of becoming the undisputed master of Japan. But in the Sengoku period, no one was safe. In 1582, while staying at the Hanaji Temple in Kyoto with only a small retinue of guards, Nobunaga was betrayed by one of his most trusted generals, Akechi Mitsuhide. Surrounded with no hope of escape, Oda Nobunaga committed seppuku, his dreams of a unified Japan dying with him in the flames of the temple. The nation, on the verge of peace, was once again thrown into chaos. Yet, Nobunaga's dream did not die entirely. It was picked up by one of his most unlikely retainers, a man who had started his career as Nobunaga's sandal-bearer. His name was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, diminutive, peasant-born, and often described as monkey-faced. Hideyoshi was no great warrior, but he was a master of diplomacy, logistics, and understanding the human heart. Upon hearing of Nobunaga's death, Hideyoshi acted with lightning speed. He disengaged from a siege he was conducting, force-marched his army back towards Kyoto, and confronted the traitor Akechi Mitsuhide at the Battle of Yamazaki. In less than 2 weeks after the betrayal, Hideyoshi had avenged his master and eliminated his rival. With Akechi gone, Hideyoshi skillfully positioned himself as Nobunaga's political and military heir. Where Nobunaga had ruled through fear and brute force, Hideyoshi ruled through a combination of overwhelming power and shrewd negotiation. He defeated the remaining independent daimyo, not just on the battlefield, but at the bargaining table, offering them positions and security within his new hierarchy. In 1590, after the successful siege of Odawara, the last major holdout clan surrendered. After a century of unceasing war, Toyotomi Hideyoshi had finally accomplished what no one else could. He had unified Japan. To solidify his rule, Hideyoshi implemented sweeping reforms, conducted a nationwide land survey to centralize taxation and administration. Most famously, he instituted the sword hunt, disarming the entire peasantry. This act effectively ended the era of the low, overthrowing the high. It created a rigid class structure, separating the farmers from the warriors, and ensuring that the samurai class would hold the exclusive right to bear arms. The age of social mobility and constant rebellion was over. But Hideyoshi's ambition didn't end with Japan. In his later years, he launched two massive ill-fated invasions of Korea, hoping to conquer Ming China. The campaigns drained Japan's resources and created deep fissures among his most powerful daimyo. When Hideyoshi died in 1598, he left behind a 5-year-old son as his heir, and a council of 5 powerful regents to govern in his place. It was a recipe for disaster. The peace he had worked so hard to build was fragile, and the ambitions he had suppressed were about to erupt once more. On one side was Ishida Mitsunari, a brilliant administrator fiercely loyal to the memory of Hideyoshi and the claim of his young son. On the other was Tokugawa Ieyasu, the patient, cunning daimyo of the eastern Kanto plain, a man who had served Nobunaga, allied with Hideyoshi, and quietly built the largest and most powerful domain in the country. He had waited his entire life for this moment. The inevitable clash came on October 21, 1600, at a small crossroads village called Sekigahara. This would be the largest and most decisive battle in samurai history. Over 160,000 warriors gathered, dividing into the Western Army, loyal to the Toyotomi heir, and the Eastern Army, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu. The fate of Japan would be decided in a single day. The battle raged for hours, a chaotic maelstrom of steel, blood, and gunpowder. Initially, the Western Army had the tactical advantage, but Ieyasu, a master of strategy and political maneuvering, had spent the night before the battle securing secret promises from several of the Western Army's commanders. At the crucial moment, key daimyo switched sides, turning their forces against their former allies. The Western Army collapsed, and Ishida Mitsunari was captured and executed. Tokugawa Ieyasu was the undisputed victor. 3 years later, in 1603, the emperor granted Tokugawa Ieyasu the title he had long sought, shogun. He established his new government not in Kyoto, but in his castle town of Edo, the future city of Tokyo. The Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, was officially over. The Tokugawa shogunate would go on to rule Japan for over 250 years of uninterrupted peace. The Age of Warlords was a century of unimaginable violence and upheaval, but it was also an era of profound transformation. It swept away a decadent and broken system, allowing for the emergence of leaders who would forge a new, unified nation. In the chaotic heart of 16th century Japan, a land fractured by a century of relentless civil war, one man's vision would forge an era of unprecedented peace. Tokugawa shogunate, a dynasty that closed Japan to the world. Tokugawa Ieyasu, a master strategist, a patient leader, and a survivor of the brutal Sengoku period. After decades of shifting alliances and bloody conflict, the final showdown arrived. In the year 1600, at the Battle of Sekigahara, Ieyasu's Eastern Army clashed with a coalition of Western lords in a monumental struggle for control of Japan. The victory was decisive. With his rivals defeated, Ieyasu was appointed shogun by the emperor in 1603, establishing a new military government, the Tokugawa Bakufu, that would rule for over 250 years. Ieyasu's primary goal was stability. He sought to create a system that would prevent the country from ever spiraling back into civil war. To achieve this, he established his new capital in a small fishing village called Edo, a strategic location far from the old imperial court in Kyoto. The foundation of Tokugawa rule was a rigid social hierarchy. At the very top, but with little political power, was the emperor, a divine figurehead. The real power lay with the shogun and the samurai class, who comprised about 7% of the population. Below them were the farmers, who produced the nation's food and were considered the backbone of society. Then came the artisans, who crafted goods, and at the bottom, the merchants. Ironically, while merchants were officially the lowest class, their wealth and influence would grow immensely throughout the Edo period. To ensure the loyalty of the regional lords, or daimyo, Ieyasu implemented the brilliant Sengoku system, or alternate attendance. This policy required every daimyo to spend every other year in Edo, serving the shogun. When they returned to their own domains, they had to leave their families behind in the capital as hostages. The immense cost of maintaining two residences and traveling back and forth drained the daimyo's finances, making it nearly impossible for them to raise armies against the shogunate. It was a masterful stroke of political control that guaranteed peace through economic pressure. With domestic order established, the shogunate turned its gaze outward and saw a world of potential threats, particularly from European colonial powers and Christian missionaries. Their response was radical and absolute. Starting in the 1630s, the third shogun, Iemitsu, implemented the Sengoku, or chained country policy. Japanese citizens were forbidden from leaving, and foreigners were barred from entering. The penalty for either was death. Trade was restricted to a single man-made island in Nagasaki Harbor, Dejima, where only the Dutch and Chinese were permitted under strict supervision. For over 2 centuries, Japan was effectively sealed off from the rest of the world. This isolation did not lead to stagnation. Instead, cut off from outside influence, Japan's unique culture flourished in a remarkable period of peace. In the bustling streets of Edo, a new world emerged, the ukiyo, or the floating world. This was the world of entertainment, pleasure, and fleeting beauty, a vibrant subculture driven by the newly wealthy merchant class. The art of the floating world was the ukiyo-e, or pictures of the floating world. These woodblock prints, mass-produced and affordable, captured the spirit of the age. Artists like Hokusai and Hirosige depicted everything from beautiful courtesans and famous kabuki actors to serene landscapes like the 36 views of Mount Fuji. These prints offered a window into the daily life, fashion, and dreams of Edo's citizens. The stage came alive with kabuki theater, known for its dramatic makeup, elaborate costumes, and stylized performances. Kabuki plays told stories of historical epics, moral conflicts, and romantic tragedies. It was the pop culture of its day, and star actors were treated like modern celebrities. In the tea houses of districts like Gion in Kyoto, another iconic figure of this era took shape: the geisha. These women were not just entertainers. They were highly skilled artists, trained in traditional music, dance, poetry, and the art of conversation. They were the epitome of refinement and grace, preserving and perfecting Japanese artistic traditions. Life for the ruling samurai class, however, was changing. In an era of peace, their role as warriors became obsolete. Many transitioned into becoming bureaucrats, administrators, and scholars. They were expected to embody the code of Bushido, the way of the warrior, which emphasized honor, loyalty, and self-discipline. But without battles to fight, many struggled to find purpose. Some fell into debt, forced to borrow from the very merchant class they looked down upon. Meanwhile, the farmers, who made up the vast majority of the population, bore the heaviest burden. They paid heavy taxes and rice to support the samurai class and the government. Their lives were hard and often unforgiving, subject to famine and the whims of nature. Yet, it was their labor that sustained the entire structure of Tokugawa society. For over 2 centuries, this intricate system held. The Tokugawa shogunate delivered on its promise of peace and stability. Cities grew, commerce thrived, literacy rates became surprisingly high, and a uniquely Japanese culture blossomed in its self-imposed isolation. But the world outside was changing rapidly. By the mid-19th century, Western powers, fueled by the Industrial Revolution, were expanding their influence across Asia. They saw Japan's isolation as a challenge and its ports as a lucrative opportunity. The end of Sengoku came abruptly in 1853. American Commodore Matthew Perry sailed a fleet of heavily armed steamships, the Black Ships, into Edo Bay. He delivered an ultimatum from the U.S. president: open Japan for trade, or face the consequences. The shogunate, with its samurai armies and traditional weapons, was powerless against modern Western military technology. Faced with this overwhelming force, they had no choice but to sign treaties that were deeply unfavorable to Japan, opening up ports and granting special privileges to foreigners. This act was seen as a profound humiliation. It exposed the weakness of the shogunate and shattered the foundation of its legitimacy. The country erupted in turmoil. Many samurai, particularly from the powerful western domains of Satsuma and Choshu, were outraged. They rallied around a new slogan, Sano Joy, meaning revere the emperor. Expel the barbarians. They argued that the shogun had failed to protect Japan and that power should be restored to the emperor. A brief but decisive civil war, the Boshin War, ensued. The forces of the imperial court, armed with modern weapons, quickly overwhelmed the shogun's armies. In 1868, the last shogun, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, formally surrendered his power to the young Emperor Meiji. The era of the shogun was over. The Tokugawa peace, which had lasted for more than 250 years, came to an end. Japan was now thrust into a period of rapid modernization known as the Meiji Restoration. The feudal system was dismantled, the samurai class was abolished, and the nation embarked on a frantic race to industrialize and build a modern military, determined to never be humiliated by foreign powers again. The legacy of the Tokugawa period is complex. It was an era of authoritarian rule and rigid social control, but also of lasting peace and extraordinary cultural creativity. In January 1868, the last Tokugawa shogun, Yoshinobu, formally surrendered his power. The emperor, a teenager named Mutsuhito, who would be known posthumously as Emperor Meiji, was officially restored to power. With the emperor back in power, the leaders of the restoration faced a daunting task: how to transform Japan into a nation capable of standing on its own against the West. They realized that expelling the barbarians was no longer a viable strategy. Instead, they adopted a new slogan: Fukoku Kyuhei, rich country, strong army. If Japan was to survive, it had to learn from its potential adversaries. It had to modernize, and it had to do so with unprecedented speed. The first step was dismantling the old feudal order. In 1869, the daimyo, the feudal lords, were persuaded to return their lands to the emperor. The domains were abolished and replaced with prefectures, creating a centralized state. The samurai class, the very warriors who had helped bring about the restoration, were stripped of their privileges. Their stipends were converted into government bonds, and they lost their exclusive right to carry swords. This was a seismic social shift. For centuries, being a samurai was an identity, a way of life. Now, they were expected to find new roles as administrators, businessmen, or officers in the new national army. While many adapted, others felt betrayed, leading to several rebellions. The most famous being the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by the last true samurai, Seigo Takamori. Though ultimately crushed, this rebellion symbolized the painful death of the old Japan. To build their rich country, the Meiji government embarked on an ambitious program of industrialization. They understood that economic strength was the foundation of military power. The government sent missions abroad, like the famous Iwakura mission, to study Western institutions, technology, and industry. They returned with a wealth of knowledge, ready to build factories, railways, and telegraph lines. The government took the lead, establishing model factories for silk, cement, and glass, then selling them to private entrepreneurs once they became profitable. This fostered the rise of powerful business conglomerates known as zaibatsu, names like Mitsubishi and Mitsui, which would dominate the Japanese economy for decades. The transformation was visible everywhere. The first railway line connecting Tokyo and Yokohama opened in 1872, shrinking distances and symbolizing the nation's forward momentum. Western-style buildings began to appear in cities. People started adopting Western clothing, hairstyles, and even food. A new national education system was established. modeled on French and American systems, to create a literate, skilled, and patriotic populace. The goal was to create a unified national identity, replacing old feudal loyalties with loyalty to the emperor and the state. The Charter Oath of 1868 declared that knowledge shall be sought throughout the world, and Japan embraced this idea with real passion. To build their strong army, the Meiji leaders looked to Europe for models. They created a modern, conscripted army based on the Prussian system, and a powerful navy modeled on the British Royal Navy. No longer was fighting the exclusive domain of the samurai. Every able-bodied male citizen was now expected to serve the nation. This new military was not just for defense. It was a tool to project Japan's newfound power and revise the unequal treaties that had been a source of national shame for so long. Japan wanted a seat at the table with the great powers, and it knew that military strength was the price of admission. Japan's rapid modernization soon put it on a collision course with its neighbors. The first major test came in 1894, with the First Sino-Japanese War. The conflict was over control of Korea, a strategically important peninsula. To the world's astonishment, the newly modernized Japanese army and navy swiftly defeated the forces of the much larger Qing dynasty of China. The victory was a stunning announcement of Japan's arrival as a major regional power. The Treaty of Shimonoseki granted Japan control of Taiwan and a significant indemnity. But a coalition of Western powers, Russia, Germany, and France forced Japan to give up some of its territorial gains in mainland China. This triple intervention was a bitter pill to swallow, fueling a belief that Japan still needed to be stronger to be truly respected. This belief pushed Japan into an even bigger conflict. Tensions with Russia over influence in Korea and Manchuria continued to escalate. In 1904, Japan launched a surprise attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur, initiating the Russo-Japanese War. This was a David versus Goliath struggle. Russia was a massive European empire, and few expected Japan to stand a chance. Japan's forces, more ready and fighting nearby, scored some surprising wins, both on land and at sea. The decisive moment came in 1905 at the Battle of Tsushima, where the Japanese fleet under Admiral Teiji Hayachiro annihilated the Russian Baltic Fleet after its long journey around the world. The victory was absolute. The Russo-Japanese War was a watershed moment in world history. For the first time, a non-Western nation had defeated a major European power in a modern war. It shattered the myth of Western invincibility and inspired nationalist movements across Asia and the world. For Japan, it was the ultimate validation of its Meiji project. It finally achieved the revision of the unequal treaties and was recognized as a global power, securing its sphere of influence and annexing Korea in 1910. The goal of rich country, strong army had been achieved. When Emperor Meiji died in 1912, he left behind a nation that was unrecognizable from the one he had inherited. In less than 50 years, Japan had transformed from an isolated, feudal society into a modern, industrial, and imperial power. The Meiji Restoration stands as one of the most remarkable stories of national transformation in history. It was a period of intense struggle, sacrifice, and ambition. Driven by a powerful sense of crisis and a relentless desire for survival and recognition, Japan had undergone a breathtaking transformation from a feudal society to a modern industrial nation. But this rapid modernization came with a powerful new ideology. A blend of nationalism, militarism, and a belief in its divine destiny to lead Asia fueled an insatiable hunger for expansion. The idea of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere was born a vision of a self-sufficient bloc of Asian nations, led by Japan and free from Western colonial rule. But this vision of prosperity would be built on a foundation of military conquest. The first major step was the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. Disguising the act as a response to a minor railway incident, they orchestrated themselves, the Kwantung Army. Acting with a startling degree of independence from the government in Tokyo, seized the vast resource-rich region. they established the puppet state of Manchukuo, a clear signal of Japan's imperial ambitions to a watching world. The League of Nations condemned the action, but its response was weak, emboldening Japan to withdraw from the international body and continue its aggressive path. The military's influence over the government grew, and political assassinations silenced dissenting voices. The nation was on a war footing, its industries and society geared for conflict. In 1937, a skirmish at the Marco Polo Bridge near Beijing escalated into a full-scale invasion of China. The Second Sino-Japanese War had begun. What Japan expected to be a quick victory devolved into a brutal, sprawling quagmire. The conflict was marked by immense ferocity. The capture of the Chinese capital, Nanjing, in late 1937, was followed by a period of horrific atrocities committed by Japanese troops, a dark chapter that remains a deep scar on the region's history. Despite capturing major cities and coastal areas, Japan could not break the will of the Chinese people, who resisted fiercely under both nationalist and communist leadership. The war in China became a massive drain on Japan's resources, manpower, and international reputation, tying down millions of its soldiers. As the war in China raged on, tensions with the Western powers, particularly the United States, reached a breaking point. Japan's continued expansion into French Indochina was a direct threat to American and European interests in Southeast Asia. In response, the United States imposed a crippling oil embargo in 1941. For a nation with almost no domestic oil production, this was an existential threat. Japan's war machine would grind to a halt in months. Faced with a choice between a humiliating withdrawal from China or a daring gamble for survival, the leadership in Tokyo chose the path of war. On December 7, 1941, the world held its breath. In a stunning surprise attack, Japanese naval aircraft descended upon the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The attack was a tactical masterpiece, crippling the American fleet and shocking the nation to its core. Simultaneously, Japanese forces launched a blitzkrieg across Southeast Asia, capturing the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and Burma with stunning speed. For a few short months, it seemed the Empire of Japan was invincible, its red sun banner flying over a vast Pacific domain. They had secured the oil and rubber they so desperately needed. But in their moment of triumph, they had awakened a sleeping giant. The tide began to turn in 1942. The Doolittle Raid, a daring bombing run on Tokyo, was a small military success, but a huge psychological blow to Japan. Then came the Battle of the Coral Sea, the first naval battle fought entirely by aircraft, which halted the Japanese advance toward Australia. But the true turning point was the Battle of Midway in June 1942. In a clash of carriers, the U.S. Navy, armed with crucial intelligence that had broken Japanese naval codes, ambushed the Japanese fleet. In the space of a few minutes, Japan lost 4 of its best aircraft carriers, the very heart of its naval power. It was a devastating loss from which the Imperial Japanese Navy would never fully recover. The initiative in the Pacific had been seized by the Allies. From that point on, the war became a brutal, island-hopping campaign. The Americans and their allies pushed relentlessly across the Pacific, fighting bloody battles for tiny strips of land. From the dense jungles of Guadalcanal to the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima and the fortified caves of Okinawa, each island was a fortress. Japanese soldiers, indoctrinated with the Bushido code of death before dishonor, fought with ferocious tenacity, often to the last man. The fighting was savage, marked by banzai charges and in the later stages of the war, the desperate tactic of the kamikaze pilots intentionally crashing their planes into Allied ships. For the American forces, it was a grim, costly advance toward the Japanese mainland. By the summer of 1945, Japan was on its knees. Its navy and air force were shattered. Its cities were being systematically destroyed by a relentless American firebombing campaign, which caused more destruction and loss of life in cities like Tokyo than the later atomic attacks. The economy had collapsed and the population faced starvation. Yet the military leadership refused to surrender, preparing the entire population for a final suicidal defense of the home islands. They called it Ketsugo, the decisive battle, expecting to inflict such horrific casualties on the invaders that the Allies would offer a negotiated peace, facing an invasion that could cost over 1 million lives. With millions of Japanese lives at stake, President Harry Truman made a huge decision. He authorized the use of a new, terrifying weapon. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. In an instant, the city was vaporized in a blinding flash of light and a mushroom cloud that rose miles into the sky. An estimated 140,000 people were killed by the blast, the heat, and the radiation that followed. Even after this unprecedented devastation, the Japanese war cabinet remained deadlocked. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki, killing another 70,000 people. On the same day, the Soviet Union, honoring its agreement with the Allies, invaded Manchuria, swiftly crushing the remnants of the Kwantung Army. The combination of these catastrophic events finally broke the stalemate. Emperor Hirohito, in an unprecedented intervention, addressed his war council and then the nation, announcing Japan's surrender. On August 15th, the people of Japan heard their emperor's voice for the first time, telling them the war was over. The formal surrender was signed aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, officially ending World War II. The Empire of Japan was dismantled. The fire that had burned across Asia and the Pacific for over a decade was finally extinguished. What was left was a nation in ruins, facing a future of occupation and reconstruction. August 1945. The world watched as Japan, a nation brought to its knees, officially surrendered, ending the Second World War. Cities like Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki lay in ruins, their skylines erased, replaced by rubble and silence. The nation was shattered, its economy decimated, and its people were facing starvation and despair. The end of the war ushered in a new, uncertain era, the American occupation. From 1945 to 1952, under the leadership of General Douglas MacArthur, Japan underwent a radical transformation. The goal wasn't just to rebuild, but to reshape the very foundations of Japanese society. The powerful zaibatsu, the family-controlled industrial conglomerates that had fueled the war machine, were dismantled. Sweeping land reforms gave tenant farmers ownership of the land they worked, creating a new class of independent landowners and boosting agricultural productivity. Perhaps the most profound change was the new constitution, promulgated in 1947. Drafted under American guidance, it fundamentally altered Japan's political landscape. The emperor, once revered as a divine figure, was redefined as a symbol of the state, with sovereignty resting with the people. Most famously, Article 9 of the Constitution renounced war as a sovereign right of the nation. This peace constitution committed Japan to a future without a military for offensive purposes, a cornerstone of its post-war identity and a decision that would have immense economic consequences. With demilitarization came a unique opportunity. Instead of spending billions on defense, Japan could pour its resources into rebuilding its industry and economy. This Yoshida Doctrine, named after Prime Minister Shigeru Yoshida, prioritized economic development under the security protection of the United States, and develop it did with breathtaking speed. The Korean War in the early 1950s provided an unexpected catalyst. Japan became the primary procurement base for the United Nations forces, a massive injection of cash that kick-started its heavy industries. This was a launchpad for what would become an economic explosion. The Japanese government, particularly the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, worked hand-in-hand with corporations. They identified promising sectors, provided crucial loans, and protected nascent industries from foreign competition. This unique model of government-business cooperation, combined with a highly educated and dedicated workforce, created the perfect storm for growth. The 1960s saw the income doubling plan, which aimed to double the national income in a decade. It achieved its goal in just 7 years. This was the age of miracles. Japanese companies mastered the art of kasam, or continuous improvement. They didn't just copy Western technology. They refined it, perfected it, and made it better, cheaper, and more reliable. Suddenly, the world was filled with products stamped "Made in Japan." In the 1950s and 60s, it was textiles and simple household goods. Then came the giants. Companies like Sony revolutionized personal electronics, from the transistor radio to the legendary Walkman, which changed how the world listened to music. In the auto industry, Toyota and Honda, initially seen as makers of small, quirky cars, began to challenge the dominance of Detroit. They introduced revolutionary production methods, like the just-in-time system, which prioritized efficiency and quality control. Their fuel-efficient, reliable cars became global bestsellers, especially after the oil shocks of the 1970s. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics was Japan's grand re-entry onto the world stage. It was a spectacular showcase of the new Japan, modern, efficient, and peaceful. The world marveled at the Shinkansen, the bullet train, a symbol of the nation's technological prowess and forward-looking vision. Japan was no longer a defeated enemy. It was a global innovator. This economic boom was paralleled by an explosion of cultural influence. While traditional arts endured, a new wave of popular culture began to captivate a global audience. Osamu Tezuka, the god of manga, pioneered the distinctive style of large-eyed characters and cinematic storytelling that would define anime and manga. Series like Astro Boy and, later, Mobile Suit Gundam found fans far beyond Japan's shores. By the 1980s, this cultural export had become a phenomenon. Manga comics filled bookshelves worldwide, and anime became a staple of television programming. Then came the video game revolution. In 1983, Nintendo released the Famicom, known internationally as the Nintendo Entertainment System. With characters like Mario and Zelda, Nintendo didn't just sell a console, it created entire worlds that captured the imaginations of millions. Companies like Sega and later Sony with its PlayStation cemented Japan's status as the undisputed king of the video game industry. From cars to consoles, from manga to Walkmans, Japanese culture and technology were shaping daily life across the planet. By the late 1980s, Japan's economic ascent seemed unstoppable. The Tokyo stock market and real estate prices soared to astronomical heights. The land value of the Imperial Palace grounds in Tokyo was famously said to be worth more than all the real estate in California. Japanese corporations were buying up iconic American assets, from Rockefeller Center to Columbia Pictures. To many, it seemed Japan had perfected capitalism and was poised to become the world's #1 economy. This was the peak of the bubble economy. It was a time of incredible wealth, confidence, and excess. The whole thing was shaky. Those skyrocketing asset prices didn't have real value behind them. It was just a wild speculation party that couldn't last. And it didn't. In 1990, the bubble burst. The stock market crashed, real estate values plummeted, and Japan's economy entered a long period of stagnation, known as the Lost Decade. The miracle, it seemed, was over. For centuries, it was a country shrouded in mystery, a closed-off world of samurai and shoguns. Japan is now a global powerhouse where rich traditions not only survive, but also thrive with cutting-edge technology. When you think of high-tech, Japan is probably one of the first places that comes to mind. From the sleek Shinkansen bullet trains that glide across the country at breathtaking speeds, to the friendly robots you might see assisting customers in a department store, innovation is woven into the fabric of daily life here. In laboratories and tech hubs across Tokyo and beyond, brilliant minds are pushing the boundaries of what's possible. We're talking about advancements in artificial intelligence that are creating smarter, more intuitive companions, and robotics designed not just for industry, but to care for an aging population with dignity and grace. This relentless pursuit of progress isn't just about creating gadgets, it's a philosophy. It's about Kaizen, the principle of continuous improvement applied to every aspect of society, seeking to make life more efficient, more convenient, and ultimately better for everyone. Japan doesn't just embrace the future, it creates it. Yet, for all its futuristic ambition, Japan holds its past in profound reverence. Step away from the bustling city centers, and you'll find a world that seems untouched by time. You can wander through the serene rock gardens of a Kyoto temple, watch artisans painstakingly craft pottery, using techniques passed down through countless generations. Or witness the solemn beauty of a traditional tea ceremony where every movement is a form of meditation. These aren't just tourist attractions. They are living, breathing parts of the national identity. The Japanese have mastered the art of compartmentalization. A salaryman might spend his day working on cutting-edge software, but in the evening, he might practice kendo, the art of the samurai sword. Festivals, or matsuri, which have been celebrated for centuries, still bring entire communities together in a vibrant display of local pride and ancient rituals. This delicate balance is the key to understanding Japan. It's a society that has figured out how to welcome the new without discarding the old, proving that modernity and tradition can be partners, not rivals. Like many developed nations, Japan is facing significant demographic headwinds. It has one of the world's oldest populations and a declining birth rate, challenges that are forcing a profound social and cultural rethink. The traditional family structure is evolving. More women are pursuing careers, delaying marriage and childbirth, and challenging long-held gender roles. This shift is creating new dynamics in the workplace and at home. You can see this change on the streets in the rise of single-person households, and in government policies aimed at supporting working parents. At the same time, a younger generation is forging its own identity. While they respect the traditions of their elders, they are also more globally connected than ever before. They are shaping their own unique subcultures, influenced by international trends, but always with a distinctly Japanese twist. This quiet social revolution is reshaping the very definition of what it means to be Japanese in the 21st century, creating a more diverse and arguably a more dynamic society. From anime and manga to sushi and karaoke, Japan's cultural influence extends to every corner of the globe. It's a phenomenon often called cool Japan. This isn't an accident. It's the result of a culture that values craftsmanship, aesthetics, and a unique form of storytelling. Think about the global appeal of Hayao Miyazaki's animated films from Studio Ghibli, which blend enchanting fantasy with deep, universal themes. Or consider the worldwide obsession with Japanese cuisine, where the focus on fresh ingredients and meticulous presentation has elevated food to an art form. This cultural export goes beyond entertainment and food. Principles like wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence, and the minimalist design philosophy seen in everything from architecture to fashion, have been embraced by millions around the world. Japan has become a soft power superpower, not through force, but by sharing its unique, captivating culture with an eager global audience, proving that a nation's greatest strength can be its creativity and its soul. So, what is the essence of Japan today? It's a nation of contrasts, a living paradox. It's a country that can lead the world in robotics while cherishing the 1,000-year-old art of flower arranging. It's where a business meeting conducted with futuristic efficiency can be followed by a moment of quiet reflection at an ancient shrine. Japan teaches us that progress doesn't have to mean erasing the past. Instead, the past can provide a stable anchor in a fast-changing world, a source of identity and wisdom that guides the path forward. It's a futuristic nation grounded in an ancient heritage, a place where every tomorrow is built upon the lessons of countless yesterdays. This unique blend is Japan's true innovation, its most valuable gift to the world. It's a reminder that to know where you are going, you must never forget where you came from. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found this fascinating, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the cultures that shape our world.